Welcome to GPJFF in Conversation. My name is Joseph Moser, and today we're delighted to host Katya Ustinova, who is the film director of SHTETLERS. So welcome, Katya.
Thank you very much.
And before we start the conversation, I would like to introduce Katya. So Katya Ustinova is a Russian-born documentary filmmaker living in New York. She has worked as a TV producer, script writer, and reporter for almost 10 years prior to switching over to documentary filmmaking. She got her MFA degree in social documentary from the School of Visual Arts in New York in 2012. Along with receiving a Paula Rhodes Award for Exceptional Achievement in Documentary Filmmaking for her thesis film. Over the past several years, she has been working on 3 feature-length films covering very different themes, stories, and characters. As the other 2 films are still in progress, SHTETLERS is her first completed feature-length documentary. In December 2020, SHTETLERS won the Laurel Branch National TV and Documentary Film Award for Best Debut in Moscow, Russia. So welcome again, Katya. And my first question is, how and or why did you decide to make a film about what remains of shtetls in the former Soviet Union?
Thank you very much for a very good question. Obviously, who knew that these small Jewish towns existed up until recently? And who would think of making a film about these places in the 21st century when all of these small towns are considered long gone? But my fascination with the theme of small Jewish towns started when my father, back in Moscow, created the Museum of Jewish History in Russia. So its unique collection remains the most authentic exhibit of Jewish life in Russia. And when my father's team of researchers and scholars started bringing artifacts from the outskirts of the former Soviet Union, like different objects like cookware, furniture, religious items, and such, I discovered that there were living people behind these objects and decided to meet with them and tell the unknown story of the Jewish settlements behind the Iron Curtain.
So, and how long did it take to interview the people in the film? Because you go all over Ukraine and Moldova. So over what period did you interview people, and how long did that take?
I think that the whole filming took several years that I still fear to name the number of these years. And there were lots of interviews that unfortunately didn't make it into the film, and that I plan to include in a separate platform on SHTETLER's website, divided into different themes. So I went to about, I guess, 20 different places, remote places in Ukraine and Moldova, and I traveled around Israel, and I think altogether, totally, I interviewed around, I don't know, maybe up to 30 people.
Wow.
Yeah, and ended up having only 9 characters in my film.
So, as you made that selection for the 9 characters, what was your motivation? What were you thinking about when you narrowed it down?
I think that the main theme of the film, this was a complex world, that um, um, a complex world that not just Jewish world, that belonged to non-Jews as well. I think that these theme and this idea of dedicating the film to this theme came later on during the editing process. So it was not the idea that I started out with. Um, so and then I think that each character in the film uh, brings brings a different theme to the film. That's how I was sort of choosing them. Each character serves a specific purpose. So there is a Holocaust survivor. There is a character who fought in the war. there are Ukrainians. There's this very unusual character who is a Jewish convert who used to be a Ukrainian and whose mother hid the Jews during the war in the ghetto, and he helped her when he was a little boy, and that's actually affected him so much, and living in this tiny Jewish shtetl, that he became Jewish himself and immigrated to Israel. So so I think every character brings a different theme to the film.
Yeah, it's definitely a very diverse set, so perhaps we can talk a little bit about the characters. And I think one of the character that many viewers immediately think about is the rabbi in Chernovtsi or Chernovitz, who, as you know, is taking money from non-Jews. Perhaps you want to talk a little bit about why you included him and how you observed his work and what he represents to you as a filmmaker.
Yeah, sure. So right after the war, Chernovtsi became known as a Jewish city, and many people moved there instead of returning back to their small towns where everyone was killed. Well, there were certainly there were lots of returnees, so-called returnees, who came to these places where everyone was killed and continued living there, but Chernivtsi, that was liberated by this Soviet army in 1944, became Soviet and became famous for being a Jewish city. So lots of Jewish people fled to Chernivtsi, and I interviewed many people there, but Rabbi Noy apparently just turned out to be the most fascinating character. Um, and so he, well, talking about this tradition, talking about this kind of like weird reception that he's having in his synagogue. So it's important to say that it's not during the service time; it's after the service. And there's also this announcement that says that on Saturdays he's not receiving people. So, as I was told by my father's museum scholars, that it is actually a very old tradition that dates back to the 18th century when the Russian Empire annexed Poland and sort of swallowed a huge chunk of Poland, and that's how it inherited its Jewish population, because before that there were no Jews in Russia. So this was a very popular tradition among the non-Jews to go see the Jewish rabbis and to ask for help, because supposedly Jewish God helped better, or they would go to tzaddiks, the Jewish righteous people, and or like miracle workers, because they were asking for help and advice. So in a way, Rabbi Noy was following this tradition, and even right now, this tradition is gone because Rabbi Noy died a couple years ago. So I was fortunate to capture these scenes. I don't think that you could find it anywhere else nowadays, which also proves the fact that uh, my film gives a glimpse into the world that is 99% gone. It's just like the farewell with this world.
Yeah, it seems in your film, especially a lot of the people you interview are older, and it seems like you're capturing them just in their final years. Can you talk a little bit about the tailor in Kolomia, which is a little bit outside of Chernovtsi? And there was also there was a synagogue he was praying in there. Um,
It was a Kolomia synagogue, yeah, and he was actually one of the first contacts, one of my first characters that I came to see. It was many years ago. And unfortunately, I only had a chance to film him for 2 days. And but he was so colorful, and with his Yiddish song, and with the fact that was he was the only person who could um, uh, quote Torah, uh, and who read Torah in Hebrew, because as a kid he went to Heder, which because he originally, his name is Shlomo, and originally he came from Romania, and he ended up in the Soviet Union, where he taught himself the tailor's craft, and where he taught himself Russian as well. So, and back in the day, what he remembered, he was surrounded, like everyone spoke Yiddish, like in Chernovitz as well. I remember Rabbi Noy telling me that even the janitors, like the non-Jews spoke Yiddish. It was it was very usual for the non-Jews to speak Yiddish too, because it was a very mixed and mixed world.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned the non-Jews, of course, then you go to Shargorod, which is further to the east in central Ukraine, and you have this couple, Volodymyr and his wife, who are, of course, not Jewish, but are very, how should I say, perhaps you can describe if it's sentimental or romantic, but they have all these fond memories of their Jewish neighbors and how they were helping the Jewish community, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about this couple, how much time you spent with them, and how you observed their memories of the Jewish Shargorod.
I loved Shargorod immensely, so that's why I kept returning back to Shargorod on and on. And again, speaking of my characters, half of them are no longer alive. Half of my characters passed away, and it is very sad that Volodya, the hat maker, he passed away, although he's from a younger generation. Um, so yeah, he they were just an amazing couple who just turned out to inherit so many things from the Jews, and they had all these nostalgic memories of being neighbors to the Jewish community. That's how actually they bought a Jewish house once the Jews left for Israel or for Australia. That's how the film opens. Volodya is roaming around the Jewish street of Shargorod, um, which is in the center of the shtetl, because the Jews always lived in the center, and the non-Jewish population lived on the outskirts. So Volodya, when he was a kid, he lived on the outskirts because only the Jews lived in the center, because they were mainly craftsmen. So they were involved in all sorts of small trade, like they were barbers, ice cream makers, shoemakers, tailors, doctors. But Volodya, he, like what he told me, like from being a small kid, he always wanted to learn a Jewish craft of. He wanted to become a tailor. So he just became an apprentice of a Jewish tailor, and then worked in a Soviet kind of tailor craftsmanship in Shargorod, and he was taught to make these old fashioned hats. So when I first met him, he was still making these hats, and he was also making some kind of shoe, like not shoes, like valenki, if you know what I mean, like felt Russian felt shoes made of felt. So and yeah, he was full of these nostalgic memories of the Jews who actually taught them um, taught him everything, and even his wife Nadia. It was, like we can see these influences even in the food. The Jews would be cooking Ukrainian borscht, and the Ukrainians, on the contrary, would pick up different Jewish dishes like stuffed gefilte fish, and um, and Nadia was also able to do the stuffed the stuffed fish in the sock, the one that the other character who still resides in Philadelphia, she's making this fish in the film. So yeah, Volodya was very dear to me, and I liked this character a lot, and I think you can tell this in the film because I keep um, coming back to him, because they sort of got orphaned, as he told me, when the Jews left. Um, he had no, like, I, I can't say he had no friends, but he was just so involved in this Jewish community life um, from his childhood that he felt really abandoned and sort of orphaned, and that's why he's so passionate about taking care of the cemetery, and yeah, and still making these hats that he was unable, as he used to say. I don't think I included this in the film, but he was still trying to sell these hats at the local market, but no one would be buying them because, as he um, as he liked to say, these were the Jews who wore these hats. They were old fashioned, so even he was unable to sell them. But for some reason kept making them.
When you met Volodya, were you surprised by the friendship between a non-Jew and a Jew in Ukraine? Or, I mean, to a lot of viewers, when they think about Ukraine and the Holocaust, they see a very negative non-Jewish population. But obviously, there's a tremendous exchange, cultural exchange, when the Jews were still there, missing the Jews. There's also the story of his mother saving Jews during the Holocaust. But did it surprise you, or how did it fit into what you thought of the shtetl starting the film?
Uh, I don't think. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Definitely did surprise me. That's why I focused on this specific theme of friendship and neighborship, which can resonate in not just, like, I mean, like, in everyone. It's just it's a film that is, to me personally, a little wider than just a neighborship between Jews and non-Jews. It could be sort of related to any close neighborship
Hmm.
nowadays. And obviously, during the Holocaust, it was a time of um, when this friendship was tested, obviously, and there was a lot of collaboration in Ukraine, and we know that from historical facts. Um, Ukrainian police collaborated with the Nazi, and it was, for many people, for the neighbors, they were afraid to help the Jews because they could end up um, being killed as well. So, but still, um, some people did hide the Jews, like Vladimir's mother, or like some. I think that even Volodya, the hat maker's mother, hid some Jews. I remember that from his interview. I just didn't include this fact because I wanted, like, the first person memories. and his mother was
Mm-hmm.
already gone.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a surprising fact for me that there was a lot of, I think all of the friendship came probably later, after the war. So
Mm-hmm.
uh,
So, and you mentioned earlier on, you talked about returning Jews. So, of course,
mhm,
how did Jews actually repopulate shtetls in the Soviet Union? Was it people who survived through hiding, or was it people who had gone further east in the Soviet Union, were able to come back? Did you get any information or sense of from Volodya or other people you interviewed how these shtetls were populated after World War II?
mhm,
Obviously, the Germans were there, and it was very difficult to survive.
mhm. So so here in America, people know more about the Polish shtetl, and little was known and is still known about what was going on in the Soviet shtetls, what Jewish life was like in the Soviet Union, particularly in these remote places of the Soviet interior. So those who managed to survive either by timely evacuation or by serving, and again serving in the army and surviving during during the war in at the front line, like my other character Isaac. So or by some um, miraculous survival, like my other character Emilia, uh, when she was standing in the line ready to be round up, and just miraculously um, escaped. So many of these people decided to go back to their hometowns. Again, my character Isaac talks about it, that uh, after the war, everyone went back, and obviously, for some people, it was a very a hard return. But some stayed in these small places, and in some cases, and in some places, this Jewish life sort of got revived. Uh, I don't think it was as vibrant as it used to be before the war, obviously, because so many people perished, and the fact that they uh, were killed and perished in the nearby woods, for instance, this fact didn't let my other character Emilia, again, she doesn't mention that in the film, but I remember that from her interview, that she would never go back to her birthplace. So she moved to a slightly bigger um, town, which is in Yiddish called Stott. Not a shtetl, but a
That's,
stott.
yeah.
It was also Jewish, but it was slightly bigger than this little shtetl where she was born. So it was, I think it depended. Stories were different. Even Isaac's family, his grandfather, along with his uncle and his many cousins, I guess he mentions something around seven cousins were killed, and he still came back to his hometown and became a successful lawyer there and met his wife. So I think it it varied from story to story. But many people, like I said, fled to Chernivtsi because it was a sort of like a new Jewish um, town. Uh, yeah. So.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that a lot of people in the West don't know about the Soviet shtetls. So, and I definitely think it's a very educational film for us in America. But as you were making it, were you thinking about a Russian audience or an audience in America? Were you thinking about a Jewish audience or non-Jewish or both, or an audience in Israel? What were your thoughts while making this film?
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a very good question. I think I was more thinking about the American audience rather than Russian and even European, because I thought that here in the US, like it is from these remote places that at the turn of the 20th century the waves of immigration were bringing people to the US. So it would be wouldn't it be like fascinating for them to find out that the shtetls persevered um, and went on to exist up until recently, which is really up until recently, because it was very important for me that even though the characters are already scattered around the world, and I filmed one character in Philadelphia, the other one in New York, and uh, at Brighton Beach, and the other one is in Israel. But there was still, which was very important, Volodya the hat maker, and some of them were still there, like the last remnants of this world and the last bearers of this culture, or someone who were witnesses, like Volodya the hat maker, to this world. So I was more aiming at the American audience, I would say, because 75% of the Ashkenazi Jews um, relate themselves to these territories that my film is talking about.
So, and another question I have is, when you think about the shtetl, of course, the big surprise in your film is that there was a shtetl after World War II, up until, as you say, recently. And then you talk about the shtot, places like Chernovtsi, where people fled to have Jewish life. When you look at these areas, would you say that there is a future still for Jewish life in the small urban communities in these areas? Is there a rural Jewish life still? Or is it really just through emigration disappearing? What is your impression?
Well, by the time I started filming, the shtetls were almost emptied of the Jewish population, and I think there is no return of Jews to these places. So those who didn't die of old age there in the shtetls immigrated to the West in the mid 90s or end 90s, and this coincided with the collapse of in the early 90s. This coincided with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I unfortunately I don't think so. I mean, like there are still Jews in big cities, obviously, in Ukraine and in Moldova, like in Chisinau, but just now. I called it in Russian. But in these places, no, I don't think anyone will be coming back. Only as a part of as members of guided tours or something like that. I heard a good news just recently that Shargard synagogue is about to be reconstructed. When I was there last time, maybe 4 years ago, it was still in a very bad shape, and it's an architectural. It is of an architectural importance. It dates back to 16th century, and it was completely abandoned. And since although it was returned to the Jewish community, but since there are not too many Jews living there were some, but most of them left. Like Volodya says when he points at each house and says, "This one is left for Australia. I don't think he says that in the film, but anyway, that's what he was telling. That's what he was telling me. This one left for Australia. This one left for Israel, and he just remembered. He remembered that there were buses coming in the early 90s or mid 90s, and just Jews were living in these buses for Israel, I guess.
Yeah. So going back to one thing you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, is you mentioned the museum in Russia that your father is involved with, the Museum of the History of Russian Jews, which is a relatively new thing. You said 2011. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about, is there an interest in documenting and learning? I mean, obviously there has to be. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about what you could see at this museum, but also how Russians or people from the former Soviet Union in these countries, how do they, relate to this history? Perhaps you can say something more about that.
So, well, it turns out that there are currently two Jewish museums in Moscow, but my father was technically he was the first, and it's a privately owned museum. So he found scholars and researchers, and they decided, and it was just, I think it all started out as a spontaneous kind of idea to make to create this museum, and then turned out in something like in a fantastic collection of artifacts that they managed to gather, I think, over a very short period of time. So even myself, on my father's request, I was bringing lots of stuff that he bought on auctions here in the US, like menorahs, and there was this fantastic ceramic jar which was used um, for the Passover borscht. Again, you see, Passover borscht, which was like a very weird, like a sour type of borscht. So, and I had another woman in Chernivtsi, which also um, didn't make it into the film, who told me how her mother made this borscht. So, so I think, yeah, there's definitely an interest in Russia towards these artifacts and the Jewish life and what was it like.
Okay, and so one final question. You obviously won an award in Russia this December. So can you talk a little bit about how the reception in Russia was to your film, and what led to this award? Um,
Yes, well, this award was initially a part of the Russian festival called Ardok Fest. But I think it's not. They're not. It's a part. Yeah, it's a part of this festival, which was rescheduled due to COVID. And actually, the film will premiere in early April in Moscow. But that's for the festival. But before that, right after I received the award, the film was theatrically released in several theaters in Russia and played just until recently. And I mean, like, due to COVID, it was still playing in the theater, but the capacity was limited to 25% of the audience. But anyway, I had two fabulous Q&As with St. Petersburg and Moscow. That was in the early December when the situation with COVID was not very good in Russia. So, but still, people came and asked wonderful questions, and I'm getting different questions. They differ a little bit from those that I'm getting in the US, because in the US people would always ask me why there is no mention of pogroms. Uh, because and I keep saying that because my characters had no recollection of pogroms, and my idea was to sort of rewind their memories back to where they could remember. So that's why the film, and they remembered their life before the war, during the war, which became sort of the watershed moment of their lives, and and what happened after the war to them. So so and for the American audience, obviously the pogroms is something that they can relate to with their family history, because that from the pogroms, the Jewish families fled at the turn of the um, 20th century to the US. So, yeah, I think that the Russian audience got to discover a whole new world for them, for themselves, like I did. It was a discovery for me and a journey for me. Although it started a little earlier from these museum artifacts and from my father's collection, but even us, I mean, like neither my father nor me, we didn't know much about it, about this world, about this small town Jewish life um, before he started creating his museum, and before I joined with the film.
Well, it's definitely a very educational film, and it's wonderful that you were able to succeed despite coronavirus in showing it at festivals, including here in Philadelphia. And we're so excited that we were able to screen it and that you were able to tell us more about your film. So thank you so much, Katya, for being with us today.
So thank you for having me for these Q&A, and it was a great pleasure for me to be a part of Philadelphia CineMondays. I hope you enjoyed the film. And oh, one important thing: if you want to hear more stories that didn't make it into the film, there is I keep posting extra footage and extra interview bites on SHTETLERS Instagram, which is called SHTETLERS. So you could see lots of new things that didn't make it into the film, like additional footage. And just a quick follow up that talking about all these interviews that I recorded and that didn't make it into the film, I plan to again use these excerpts and these interview bites on SHTETLER's Instagram. And as well, this was also a part of my sort of venture when I started out. I was thinking uh, when I was thinking that one day all of these interviews would become available in my father's museum as well. So not only just this whole film, but everything I recorded, because all of these interviews are really precious, and I captured some horrific, some horrible, horrifying Holocaust stories, but ended up using just a few, because I mean, like, because you have to be anyway tight in the film.
So just to recap, that's on SHTETLER's Instagram, because I want to
Mm-hmm.
check that out right after
Oh
this.
yes, please, please.
So it's SHTETLER's on Instagram. Yeah.
I just yesterday I made some new videos that I'm going to post tonight.
Wonderful. So everybody, if you want to know more, make sure to go on Instagram and check out Katya's SHTETLER's Instagram page. And again, thank you so much for being with us today. And we're so happy to have had you at our film festival in Philadelphia.
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph, for your wonderful questions. Thank you. Bye bye.